I have always loved traveling, seeing new places, meeting new people, and staying in unique accommodations were my passions. So when I found a charming old house listed on Airbnb, I booked it without hesitation. It was a large Victorian-style home in a small, quiet town. The price was cheap, and the pictures showed a cozy, well-kept place with antique furniture and a lovely garden. I arrived on a chilly Thursday evening. The house was even more beautiful in person. Its white walls and dark wooden beams gave it a timeless look. The garden was filled with flowers, even in the late autumn weather. I rang the doorbell and was greeted by the host, Mrs. Hilda, a sweet elderly lady with kind eyes and a warm smile. She showed me around the house, explaining the rules and pointing out the amenities. Everything seemed perfect. After settling into my room, I decided to explore the house. The living room had a large fireplace, and the kitchen was stocked with everything I might need. There was a long hallway with several doors leading to different rooms. Mrs. Hilda mentioned that some areas were off-limits, like the basement. "It's old and dusty down there," she said. "Not much to see." That first night, I slept well. The bed was soft, and the room was quiet. But the next day, something strange happened. As I was having breakfast, I heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like a faint, muffled cry. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just the old house settling or perhaps a cat outside. But the noise continued, growing louder and more desperate. Curiosity got the better of me. I went to the basement door and pressed my ear against it. The crying was coming from inside. I knocked lightly, but there was no response. I tried the door, but it was locked. I felt a chill run down my spine. I found Mrs. Hilda in the garden, tending to her flowers. "Excuse me, Mrs. Hilda," I said, trying to sound casual. "I heard some noises coming from the basement. Is everything all right down there?" She looked at me with a strange expression. "Oh, that must be the wind," she said quickly. "This old house makes all sorts of noises." I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to press her. Instead, I decided to investigate on my own. That evening, after Mrs. Hilda went to bed, I took a flashlight and quietly made my way to the basement door. The crying had started again, more desperate than before. I searched the house for a key and eventually found one in a drawer in the kitchen. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door. The basement was dark and cold. The air smelled musty, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. I followed the sound of the crying, my heart pounding in my chest. At the far end of the basement, I found a small makeshift room. Inside, sitting on a dirty mattress, was a man. He looked thin and frail, with a long beard and sad eyes. His clothes were tattered, and he shivered in the cold. "Help me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Please help me." I was shocked. "Who are you?" I asked. "What are you doing here?" "My name is Yuri," he said. "I used to be a tenant here, but I lost my job and couldn't pay the rent. Mrs. Hilda said she would help me, but she locked me down here instead. Please help me get out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could this sweet old lady do something so cruel? I knew I had to help him. I gave Yuri some of my food and a blanket. "I'll find a way to get you out," I promised. The next day, I tried to confront Mrs. Hilda, but she was nowhere to be found. I searched the house but found no sign of her. I called the police and explained the situation. They arrived quickly and searched the house. When they entered the basement, they found Yuri just as I had left him. Mrs. Hilda was found later that day in the nearby woods. She had been living a double life, posing as a kind old lady while keeping Yuri prisoner in her basement. The police took her into custody, and Yuri was taken to a hospital. He was weak and malnourished, but grateful to be free. The whole experience left me shaken. I couldn't believe how close I had come to staying in a house with such a dark secret. I left the town the next day, eager to put the whole ordeal behind me. But I will never forget Yuri's haunted eyes and the sound of his desperate cries. From then on, I was more careful about the places I stayed and the people I trusted. The world is full of surprises, and not all of them are good. I had learned that lesson the hard way. It was a cold, rainy Friday night. I had just come home from a long day at work, feeling exhausted and looking forward to a quiet evening alone. The house was dark and silent when I stepped inside, the only sound being the rain tapping against the windows. I dropped my keys on the table and kicked off my shoes, grateful to be home. As I walked into the living room, I noticed something strange. A faint smell, like something rotting, lingered in the air. I wrinkled my nose and made a mental note to check the fridge for any spoiled food later. For now, I just wanted to relax. I grabbed a blanket and settled onto the couch, turning on the TV for some background noise. After a few minutes, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was more than just the cold air, it was a feeling of being watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling persisted. I glanced around the room, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. I decided to ignore it and focused on the TV, but the sense of unease stayed with me. As the night went on, I heard odd noises coming from upstairs. At first, it was just a creak here and there, but soon it became more pronounced, like footsteps. My heart started to race, and I paused the TV, straining to listen. There it was again, a definite thud followed by a shuffling sound. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a burglar or an animal? I knew I had to find out. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slowly made my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The sounds grew louder as I approached the top of the stairs. I hesitated for a moment, then forced myself to keep going. As I reached the hallway, I saw that the door to the guest bedroom was slightly ajar. A dim light was coming from inside. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open with my foot, shining the flashlight into the room. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, crouched in the corner, was a man. His clothes were dirty and torn, his hair matted and unkempt. He looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes, and I could see that he was shaking. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. The man didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police or confront him? My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I decided to stay calm and try to talk to him. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I had nowhere else to go." His words tugged at my heart. He looked so pitiful, so broken. Despite my fear, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Silas," he replied, his voice trembling. "I've been living on the streets for months. I found your house, and it was empty. I thought maybe I could stay for a while, just until I found somewhere else." My mind was racing. This man had been living in my house without me knowing. How long had he been here? How had he managed to stay hidden? I took a step closer, trying to understand his situation. "Why didn't you go to a shelter?" I asked. Silas shook his head. "The shelters are full. They turn people away." I was desperate. I stood there, torn between fear and compassion. This man had invaded my home, but he was clearly in need. I didn't know what to do. Should I help him or call the police? My thoughts were interrupted by another noise, a soft sob. Silas had started to cry. Seeing him like that, so vulnerable, I made a decision. "Okay, Silas," I said softly. "You can stay for the night, but tomorrow we'll figure something out. I can't have you living here without me knowing." Silas looked up at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." I nodded and backed out of the room, closing the door behind me. My heart was still pounding, but I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done the right thing, I told myself. I would help Silas find a better place to stay. As I headed back downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a very unexpected turn. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of Silas and what I should do next. Morning came all too soon, and with it, the reality of the situation I had found myself in. But as I got up to face the day, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could make a difference in Silas's life. And maybe, in doing so, I would find a new purpose in my own. This story takes place when I was a junior in high school. For context, here's a little background information. Back in the day, I was a pretty involved student, took all the hard classes, and was in a few varsity sports. In one of these ways, I was always busy and didn't have much time for myself. Part of me was thankful for that. It provided me an escape from a world where my parents had recently parted ways and my older brother had just gone to college. It was just me and my little brother then. He also was a swimmer and a smart kid in his own right. We were really similar, even to this day, but probably because of the stress our family situation put on us at the time, we didn't get along well at all. One of those wet winter days in the Midwest, I'd put in my time at school and swim, and I still had to sit down for several hours of homework. This time, I had to write an essay for some advanced class that I wasn't really interested in. I dropped my swim bag at the door when I got home and looked around my house to see if anyone was home. Empty. Dad must be out with Carwin at swim practice. His club team had the slot at the pool after the high school team was done. I popped in a mouthful of Cheez-Its and headed down to the basement to my office to get some schoolwork done. The house was a middle-class two-story with an unfinished basement, with the exception of what I referred to as my office. From a career past, my dad used to work from home but no longer did. I was the only one who used this place, so my family, or what was left of it, just called it Azaria's office. So I made my way across the concrete floors and unattached carpet scraps down there to the one finished-out room in the basement. I flicked on the CFL light. It was like any other night after practice. I still had hours of homework to do, so I turned on the computer and started typing away. I was typing for what seemed like an hour, trying to bring words to what the concept of hedonism and the picture of Dorian Gray meant to me as best I could, or as convincingly as I could. Out of the dark, I heard my little brother call out to me. "Azaria, Azaria, come up." Almost reflexively, I called back to him, "Carwin, I'm working." "What do you need?" We would yell through the house like brothers do, but it took me a minute to realize I didn't hear him come home. I got no response, only for a couple of minutes, though. Again, I heard my little brother's voice sing out, "Azaria, Azaria, come up." It felt strange hearing those words carry across the dark concrete floor. He's supposed to be at swim practice. I called back out to him, asking if he needed anything, but again I received no answer. I thought about just starting my essay again, but the family situation was delicate at best, and I didn't want to be in trouble if my little brother actually needed something. I made the decision to get up and go find out for myself. I bounded up the basement staircase the only way a high schooler can, and I called out again for my brother, "Carwin, what's up? I'm really busy." I checked all around the main floor looking for my little brother or even signs he was home. No shoes, no backpack, so he wasn't home, and there was no car in the driveway either. The only reason my dad would be gone right now would be to pick him up. Satisfied, I turned back for the stairs when I heard my little brother's voice ring out again, "Azaria, Azaria, come up." This time, every hair on my body stood on end. It just didn't make sense. He had to be at practice, and if he really needed me, he would have come to me. I got to the base of the second floor stairs and called out to him one more time, "Carwin, what's going on? Are you okay?" For a minute, no answer. "Carwin, I'm really busy. Can you tell me what's up?" It was quiet for way too long as I stared up the dark staircase. Logically, I had no reason to believe anyone was up there until I heard Carwin's voice calmly speak this time, and not call out in his sing-song way those same 4 words, "Azaria, Azaria, come up." "What?" I asked under my breath. I couldn't comprehend the situation. I did a quick inventory of any probable scenario: break-in, wrong voice, a prank. I would have seen something at this point. It had to be Carwin, and maybe helping him would make me a good brother, so I began up the stairs. My heart pounded with each step, and I was about to make the landing to the dark second floor when I heard the buzz of the garage door motor. I ran back down the stairs and looked out the window. It was my father's sedan, and he and my little brother got out. I stumbled from the window to the hall where they would enter, and I felt my heart almost stop beating. I collapsed on the floor and just started to cry uncontrollably. A few years ago, I worked as a pizza delivery driver. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills. One night, I had a delivery to a house on the other side of town. It was a football night, and the streets were busier than usual. The order seemed pretty standard: a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese and a side of garlic bread. I remember that night clearly. The weather was cold, and a drizzle had started just as I got into my car. I put the pizza on the seat beside me and started the engine. The radio was playing some old rock songs, which I liked. I drove carefully, watching the road through the misted-up windshield. It was a bit past the promised delivery time when I arrived at the address, but only by a few minutes. I parked the car and grabbed the pizza. The house was dark, which seemed odd since they had ordered food. I walked up to the front door and knocked. There was a long pause before the door creaked open slightly. A man looked out, his face half hidden in the shadow. "You're late," he said in a gruff voice. I checked my watch. "Only by a few minutes," I replied, trying to stay polite. "Sorry about that. It's $18.50. The door opened wider, and I saw there were 3 other men behind him. They all looked rough and intimidating. I suddenly felt very uneasy. The first man stepped forward, and before I knew what was happening, he grabbed my shirt and pulled me inside. "Hey," I yelled, but my voice sounded weak and scared. They pushed me against the wall. The man who had pulled me inside now had a knife in his hand. He pressed it against my neck, just hard enough to make me freeze in terror. "Give us your money," he demanded. My heart was pounding. I reached into my pocket and handed over the money I had earned from the night's deliveries. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The man with the knife grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Is that all?" he asked. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. He stepped back, still holding the knife, and the other men closed in, checking my pockets for anything else of value. They found my phone and took it too. "Please," I managed to say, "just let me go. I won't tell anyone." They laughed. One of them slapped me on the back hard enough to hurt. "Sure you won't," he said sarcastically. I don't know how long they kept me there, taunting me, but it felt like forever. Eventually, they seemed to lose interest. The man with the knife looked at me one last time. "Get out of here," he said, and I didn't need to be told twice. I stumbled out of the house and ran to my car. My hands were shaking so much that I had trouble getting the keys into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I sped away, not looking back. When I got back to the pizza place, I told my boss what had happened. He called the police, and I gave them a description of the men in the house. The police took my statement and said they would look into it. For the next few days, I was on edge, jumping at every little noise. A week later, the police called me. They had caught the men. It turned out they were known for causing trouble in the area. I was asked to come down to the station to identify them, which I did. They were the same men who had robbed me. A few months later, I got a call from the police again. They told me that the men had been found guilty and were going to prison. They also said they had recovered some of my money and asked if I could come by to pick it up. I went to the station and was handed an envelope with my earnings inside. It wasn't a lot, but it felt good to get it back. More importantly, I felt a sense of closure. Those men were off the streets, and I could go back to my life without that constant fear. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.